Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
We work both internet startups as well as enterprises which could be listed on the stock exchange. So there is a great mix of small and large companies, and we help them collect and disburse money. So that has been our core business over the last 6 years or so, and we process upwards of 20 billion US dollars on an annual basis. And we have been growing somewhere around 100% annually, I think, over the last few years.
That was Reeju Datta, the co-founder of CashFree, and he is our special guest on this episode 141 of the Leaders in Payments podcast, and I'm your host, Greg Myers. And hey, before we get started, a quick reminder that March is Diversity and Inclusion Month, so if you're interested in sponsoring or being a guest on the show, please reach out to me at greg@leadersinpayments.com. So back to this episode. For those of you who may not know, CashFree is an online platform that helps companies accept payments via more than 100 different payment methods with one single integration. And 100 different digital options is pretty significant, especially in comparison to our local ecosystem that dominates mainly by credit, debit, and ACH. According to Reeju, CashFree was created to solve one major problem: how to facilitate cash payments at the time of delivery for e-commerce merchants. And in just a short amount of time, the company has managed to facilitate 3 to 4% of all bank transfers in the country and 10% of all bank cards. As for their competitive advantage, they offer a more diverse approach to payments that looks beyond payment collection to more complex forms of commerce, including bi-directional and multi-directional payment capabilities, with a disbursement step that's easy to integrate and automate. We've got a great episode ahead, so let's get started. Hi, Reeju. Thank you for being here, and welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast.
Good to be here, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's dive right in. If you don't mind, tell our audience a little bit about yourself, maybe where you grew up, where you went to school, where you currently live, a few things like that. We'll dive deeper into your professional career a little bit later, but maybe a few high-level things about yourself.
Got it. Yeah, so I grew up in New Delhi in India. I went to college, engineering school. It's an Indian Institute of Technology, and studied engineering. And post that, I've been working in internet companies for like 1 or 2 years before we decided to take the plunge and build a payments company, right? And it just happened along the way. Not much of payment experience, I would say. But yeah, we've learned things, figured things along the way.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that payments company. Let's talk about CashFree. So maybe if you don't mind, set the stage a little bit about the marketplace in India and then dive into the company and tell us a little bit about what they do.
Yeah. So I think India as a payments market is probably a bit different from outside, because when we started off, cash was very, very prevalent in India, right? I think card penetration was relatively much lower as compared to other geographies. And that was one of the problems that we wanted to solve when we started CashFree. And another thing that is probably a bit unique to India is that the number of payment methods is kind of very, very immense, right? We have close to 100 digital payment methods that people might opt for to pay online. Whereas in a geography such as the United States, it would probably be a lesser number. I think a large fraction of the payments could happen via credit card, debit card, or maybe ACH. So yeah, I think so. Those are the maybe a couple of key differences that was there. People really had a predisposition towards paying by cash, and that has changed over the last 5-6 years or so. And today, I think India is one of the, in terms of digital payments, India definitely is a global leader. And I think we have a payment method called UPI to thank for that, and we can discuss that as we go along. So that's how I think the market is different. And it's a huge market, of course, right? I mean, we have a lot of people. I think it's the second most populous country, right? So yeah, that's the sense.
Okay. And if you don't mind, tell us about CashFree.
CashFree is an online payment processor. We help businesses operating in India accept payments through more than 100 payment methods with a single integration. And we also help these businesses disburse money out into bank accounts or other payment addresses, like payment wallets and UPI addresses, which are again connected to the bank accounts. So businesses that are coming on board, let's say they want to run a store online, or they want to process refunds, pay their vendors, pay rewards for if they're a gaming company, so those kind of use cases typically, and we work with both internet startups as well as enterprises which could be listed on the stock exchange. So there is a great mix of small and large companies, and we help them collect and disburse money. So that has been our core business over the last 6 years or so, and we process upwards of 20 billion US dollars on an annual basis. And we have been growing somewhere around 100% annually, I think, over the last few years, the pandemic notwithstanding. So that's a rough sense, right? As of today, while we're doing a lot of things in payments, I think there is a sense of diversifying into more forms of payments that are not online. So that could be point of sale terminal payments, where we are seeing abundance of, or contactless payments that are coming online. We're seeing QR code based transactions that are becoming very popular. We're also looking at cross border payments. Right. So these are some of the new initiatives that we have been tinkering with beyond the core business of collection and disbursement of money. Right. Banking as a service is again an interesting offshoot of payments that we have seen. So while the core business remains collection of payments, disbursement of payments, there's a lot of interesting things that is happening in the industry, and it's a very rapidly changing industry, as we all know.
And you mentioned e-commerce, so most of your business today is online, but are there specific verticals within that online area, or is it basically anyone that's selling products or services online is a potential customer?
Yeah, I think in terms of the number of customers, I think majority would be e-commerce customers who would be running a store online. But having said that, if you look at the volume of payments that are being processed, I think because of the high ticket size, I think you have travel. I think that tends to be a major use case always, travel and hospitality. We have education businesses, which could be educational institutes trying to accept fees for the courses that they provide. Could be schools, could be colleges, universities. We have government institutions that use us for various government related payments. Could be challans, could be tax payments, right? We have B2B transactions also that happen, right? So I mean, it's a wide mix. Financial services is pretty big. You have loan disbursements, loan repayments, insurance premiums. So financial services and e-commerce, I would say, are some of the larger segments in terms of the number of merchants. In terms of volume of payments processed, it would probably be travel and the financial services again, right? So that's a proper sense of, I think, what we're doing.
Okay. And how big is the company, maybe in number of employees, if you can tell us that?
So I think we're around 490 employees as of today. And I think we've grown quite a lot over the pandemic. We were probably around 120, 130 people about 1.5 years back, or maybe 2 years back now. So yeah, that's how we're placed.
And I know at least here in the US during the pandemic, we saw a lot of businesses move to selling online, right? It was a necessity. They had to do it. They had to figure out how to do it. Was there sort of that same sense there in India that companies who maybe traditionally sold more face-to-face had to go online? So assuming that's the case, I would imagine that was quite a help for your business to really keep it growing just because of the market dynamics during the COVID over the last 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a trend we saw as well when the pandemic struck the first quarter, which was April, May, June. I think we saw a spike in the number of merchant onboardings, right? And I think those went up 50% month on month. And I think a lot of the small businesses suddenly had to operate online. And we saw a preference for low code and no code solutions, things like payment links, payment forms, because this was a pretty overnight change. So that's where we also focus some of our efforts in terms of product priorities. We also saw a lot of these enablers of e-commerce or enablers of online business coming up, right? So we had platforms that help you get your shop online in minutes. So those kind of platforms also saw a lot of growth, and they in turn were using us as a payment processor, right? So through that channel also we saw a lot of growth, so both direct as well as partnered approach. And I think also dialing back to my point about educational institutes, right? We saw that trend in educational institutes also, because almost every institute had to collect fees online. Whereas before that, maybe they were a bit indifferent. I mean, it was not mandatory, right? So education is maybe one sector where we saw a lot of need for collecting payments online because of the pandemic, because everything just went remote very suddenly.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like the same sort of thing that happened here is a lot of businesses very quickly had to figure out how to sell online. Well, what would you say differentiates your company from your competitors out there?
I think so. What we brought into the industry was a modular approach to payments, which looked at not just basic payment collections, but more complex payments, right? So, for example, if you are a marketplace that needs to settle money to its vendors, what if you are a platform that has a lot of gig economy workers doing delivery services, or let's say Uber rides, just for example, right? So, there you need to probably pay out your partners on a very regular basis, it typically daily, even hourly, right? In some cases. So I think we had built ourselves to cater to these kinds of complex use cases where you could be a platform or you could be a fintech company, which would have to do bi-directional or multi-directional payments with certain business rules that are applied. So as I said, right, so both collections and disbursals is what we're pretty good at, and we're pretty flexible at handling these kind of complex use cases and at scale. So that I would say is a differentiator. So as of today, I think we process around 3 to 4% of all of the bank transfers that happen in the country, and we've probably sent or received money to more than 10% of all the bank accounts in the country as well. So basically, that's I would say is the differentiator, right? The complex payment flows that the new emerging business models do come up with.
Okay, and what percentage of your business is more the payment processing side versus the disbursement side?
So I think it's an equal split both in terms of volume and revenue. But as far as disbursements are concerned, we are the largest in the country with more than 50% market share. And overall, also, I think we are among the leading payment processors in the country. So I think we were the first ones that came up with the disbursements. I think we were able to get some foothold and get the right kind of customers in that space. Yeah.
Okay. And how do you go to market? Do you have like a direct sales force, or do you have a partnership or channels, or do you go to market with both?
We go to market with both. I think there are three channels actually. One where we have a direct sales force doing direct outreach. We have an inbound channel where customers find us or hear about us and then they sign up. And then we have a partnered approach where we have partners that help us onboard merchants or customers at scale. So these are the three approaches we follow, and I think all three are significant and have been growing and contributing revenues.
And you mentioned the sort of banking, and I want to kind of just dive into that for a second. So do you provide infrastructure for banks to process, or are banks more like a partner that refer business to you? What is your relationship in the banking world?
Yeah, so I think we work very closely with banks, and there are multiple touch points and ways in which we collaborate. I mean, I can highlight them one by one. So banks do provide us referrals, and they have access to a lot of the payment problems. So in fact, the most interesting and complex payment problems first come to the banks and then they come to us. So having a strong bank referral channel is pretty important. That is one. Then we have white label integrations with banks, wherein if banks want to provide a payment processor of their own, sometimes they want to prefer that. So there we have some kind of a white labeled partnership that is tighter than just a referral program that is running with banks. There we still have not gone into a core payment processing with the banks, and that is something that we're thinking about to become more vertically integrated. So that is something that is probably we're thinking about and working towards. And the last part is I think probably banking as a service, which I had touched upon, where we are essentially acting as a distributor of banking services. And there we are kind of looking at banking services like account opening, account operations, accessing statement, open banking, functions like balance statements and so on, right? And we're collaborating with banks on one end and fintechs or internet companies wanting to be fintechs at the other end. Essentially, we are helping the bank acquire more customers, much faster. We're a distributor of banking services in the latter case, which is banking as a service. Right? So these are a few engagements that happen with banks. And of course, when we are processing payments, we have a sponsor bank, which is an acquirer for us. And there also we are very closely tied up and helping the bank make revenue on the acquiring side as well.
And where do you see the payments industry heading, say, in the next 2 to 3 years? What do you feel like it starts to look like? What are the trends? What are the things that we need to be watching out for?
Got it. I think real-time payments from a global perspective, I think real-time payments is something, I mean, having watched the success or the tremendous growth of that in India is something that we should all look out for. I think we had UPI in India, and that I think is clocking around $1 trillion of volume today. I think from zero up to, I think, 4 years back. So, and doing more transactions than credit cards and debit cards combined, within a period of 4 years, right? So mobile first real time payments is something that we can expect coming up across the world globally. Apart from that, I think within India, I would probably say we're looking at contactless payments that is coming up, right? I think outside of India, we have seen tap and pay quite a lot, but in India, I think it's still coming up and new, right? So ideally, not just card tap and pay. I think cards saved within the phone and then the phone being used to tap and pay is something that we can look forward to on POS terminals. So those are the few things. I think open banking, I think, as I mentioned, so taking banking outside the box of a bank where you can have third party platforms or third party fintechs offering access to banking services is again something that we are seeing outside of India and in India as well. So I think those are probably a few trends. I think definitely, I think since there is a lot of talk of cryptocurrencies, I think cross-border money transfer, I think there are a few interesting projects that we have seen and in general are happening across the globe, right? How can you make cross-border transfers faster, and how can you make them cheaper? For India in particular, how can you ensure that the regulatory compliance is also maintained while we are doing cross-border transactions? So those are a few thoughts there.
Okay. And I never can leave the future discussion without asking about cryptocurrency. So, any views? I mean, I know here in the States, it's seen as obviously more of an investment or an asset that you buy and hold and sell. But there are also companies who are starting to use Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as a method of payment. So, curious your thoughts on where crypto is in India, kind of your view. Do you think that in 5 years or so, people will be buying and selling things using crypto as a method of payment?
I think in India, it is probably some way away. I would say immediately we don't see crypto being used as an instrument to exchange value, I think, as of now. I think that's the stance. Whether it can be used as an asset is something the government is still to come out up with the clear guidelines. So let's wait and watch there how things go about. So it's not very clear, what the stance is internally. But I think as a legal tender for exchange of value and to purchase goods and services, that might be some way away for India as far as India is concerned.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about you. So tell us about your journey to your role there. When you graduated from college, what were sort of your career journey and how you got there? And then talk a little bit about your role there at the company.
After university, I think kind of the trodden path that most university graduates follow in India. I took up a job at a consulting company in Delhi. After that, I wanted to kind of dabble. There was some interest and in startups because that was the time when new things, new ventures was just starting to come up. Right today, it's kind of there are thousands of startups, and that time it was, I think, just starting to come up. And we tried a few things, right? And then one of the ventures did not work out. It was in the real estate space. And by that time, I had joined an internet startup and I was doing digital marketing there. And that's when I met my co founder through a common friend. And we discussed payments, and it seemed like a large market. We initially wanted to solve cash payments at the time of delivery for e-commerce, right? That was the problem that we wanted to solve initially. Hence, we're called CashFree Payments, right? So, and that's how we took the plunge. It seemed like a large market and it seemed like a problem that we'd faced personally. And then since none of the existing payment providers were solving it, so we went for it. Along the way, we figured out it might be a bit hard to scale. And then our customers at that point of time, which were restaurants which operated at night, they were looking at a website payment processing. That's how we built a website-based payment checkout flow, and that took off. And along the way we figured out there was this demand that everyone was doing collection of payments, but there were new business models that were coming up at that point of time, which, let's say, needed to pay wages, which needed to pay rewards in gaming, right? So which needed a bi-directional flow of payments, which needed a disbursement stack and disbursements that were easy to integrate, that were automated, fast, instant, right? So, and that's when we brought out payouts as an offering, and we built it in a way that someone who was collecting payments could also do payouts very easily. And then we got a foot in the door, and that's how our growth story started. Along the same time, we raised money from Y Combinator in 2017. That also gave us a lot of global exposure, I think. Right. And then that's how the journey was, right? We kept adding customers gradually and then we kept growing. I think that's how it turned out.
Okay. And you're obviously a co-founder of the company, and I think you have one other partner. So how do you split up the management between the two of you?
A lot of we do walk a bit into each other's role also, but largely I think as of today I do a bit of the operations, I do marketing, the customer support, a bit of the legal. So these are the functions I'm handling today. Some of the new initiatives and hiring, so those are the things I work on as of today. In the past I've done things like finance, also done a bit of the reconciliation and filed a bit of the taxes, making sure that we are in compliance with the regulations. So those are the things, and I think my co-founder looks after product engineering. Sales we still split between the two of us, right? So that's how the roles are distributed roughly.
I always like to ask this question of co-founders because especially that have been in business for a few years like you guys have. Do you remember the very first employee you hired?
Yes, of course. I mean, I think our first employee. So it's actually strange how we define the first employee, because we had a couple of people who kind of worked with us part time and then they joined us later. And then we had our first employee who also found us after a news article online, and then he like just reached out to us and then he came on board. And so and we had a great journey. We have had a great journey. So all of them are with us even today. So it's not a short-term association. I think they're just an integral part of the founding team, and they've been pretty instrumental in the success, right? So yeah, so I mean, I think we clearly remember and we share good memories even now, how the journey has been.
Yeah, that's great. So what are some things you're passionate about? So maybe one personal passion and one business related passion.
Personally, I like to spend time traveling and also playing. So when I do get time, I mean, I think at least once a week we try to play. Mostly, sometimes people from the office as well. So we play football, we play cricket. I enjoy playing football personally more than cricket. Yeah, and I've been traveling around, I think, over the last 1 year or two. So I think the idea, personal passion is probably to travel a few countries that you always wanted to travel. So that is work in progress. Business wise, I think, I'm pretty passionate about what are the new things in fintech that could happen and how we can make an impact there. So I think I had mentioned banking as a service, right? So that I see as a pretty big opportunity where we can really speed up rather the access or distribution of banking services in the country. We can enable non-fintechs to become a fintech company and offer banking services very easily. So that is something that I try to spend time internally, and that's some of the progress that we're making.
Okay. And when people coming out of college today, I think, at least with a lot of people that I talk to, the whole payments and fintech market has become a very interesting place to work. I mean, when I got into the industry 15 years ago, sort of just fell into it. It wasn't a purposeful or an intentional move into payments. But a lot of people today they're coming out of college or university and they see this exciting industry of fintech where all this money's being invested and these companies are growing and there's a lot of interesting stories. And my question is, when these people are coming out of school and they look at the industry and say, hey, I want to go into the fintech space, what would your advice be to them? As someone who's been in the space for a while, what would you tell them they should do to be successful in their careers?
It should be a bit of a first principles thinking, in the sense that one should know what they're doing and why they're doing. This is what we tell to some of our new joinees, also at the company. Like they should be clear about not just the actual thing that they're doing. Like let's say you're doing onboarding merchants, right? But they should be clear that why they're onboarding merchants or what is the actual goal. I mean, if you're onboarding merchants, for example, it should be quick, it should be correct, and it should also keep in mind the risk that the company could incur by onboarding the wrong kind of merchant, right? So the why of the roles, I think, is very important whenever they're doing that, and that is something people can keep in mind, right? Beyond just the role, how does the role fit in within the broader scheme of things of the company, why that role is important for the company. Those are things that people can help. For example, right, like in product, I think it's very important for someone who is in the product function to think about the overall growth of the product and how it adds to the revenue of the company. I think that kind of mindset is something that makes things easier, rather than, let's say, just doing a bunch of integrations and making sure that the product works, right? I think if you're thinking holistically about how this product is actually important for the company, how it can grow, how it can generate revenue for the company, I think those are the things I think that help.
I think that's some great advice. Well, Reeju, we've covered a lot of ground about the company, about you, about the industry. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Nothing. I think it was great. I think talking with you, Greg. I had a nice time. I got a thought, was able to think a bit also about all of this. So yeah, it's good.
Okay. And one final question. What would be the best way for people to learn more about the company?
They can visit www.cashfree.com. Our website has a lot of details about what we do and how we do. And they can always drop us a note also. And we're hiring. So if you're interested, I think there's the careers page as well. And we're definitely hiring across roles.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. I know your time is very valuable, so I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks a lot, Greg. Pleasure.
And to all you listeners out there, I thank you for your time as well. And until the next story.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.